Hi, so my name is David Gallacher. I'm the knowledge broker for the Innovation Hub at Charles Darwin University for drought and rangelands innovation. Uh, yeah, and I'm talking about managing livestock on Arabian rangelands for this presentation. So the first point that I want to make is that uh, before you undertake any sort of activity of rewilding, you really need to define what the aim is, what you're trying to do. So, you'll often say, "Well, we want to return it to natural conditions," and when you nut it down, that's rarely the case. Like you can make it as natural as possible, but there are other activities, there are other things that come into play with that. So, um, you know, activities for culture and adventure tourism. So, having livestock for safaris, livestock for Bedouin experiences means that there's still livestock in the area, and they need to be they need to be catered for. They need to be kept into the equation. Wildlife tourism. So, if you want visitors to the region, people traveling around the region to see a lot of wildlife, then you probably need to enhance the wildlife that's there. You can't just expect it to come back naturally because in NEOM, there really weren't. There was a very low density of wildlife there in historical terms because vegetation was so low. Um, yeah, if you're including apex predators, there's a whole bunch of other issues about how you manage them and how you manage the issues of the fact that carnivores kill things, and so how do you prevent them from attacking people? How do you prevent those sorts of accidents? So there's a lot of different questions there to define what the aim is, and all of these things affect your management strategy. Right? So in NEOM, the main threats are overgrazing, and that can be overgrazing by livestock. At the moment, the large number of camels and goats, and some other livestock as well, but mostly camels and goats through the region. Many of those are connected to, probably most of those are connected to Bedouin, so they're transient. But we don't know how many are actually resident in the area as well. Okay, but if you take out all of those wildlife and you replace them with all those livestock and you replace them with wildlife, then you can have similar issues of overgrazing by wildlife as well. So it's not whether it's natural livestock or wild. It's really just the number of animals there and what their dietary requirements are. Off-road driving is huge. It has big effects. When you drive over sand, it will kill the roots underneath. So even if vegetation above ground is still there, you're still affecting the hydrology and stuff that's underneath. And of course, as well as the scars of tracks appearing everywhere, it also tends to produce rubbish. Um, Tree planting. One of the big threats for NEOM that you're going to have is the push to plant trees where trees did not naturally grow. Right? And I can't stress enough that this is actually a limitation for rewilding because um, for the most part, trees do not provide food for the wildlife that you're interested in putting back in. So it's taking moisture away from plants that can support those animals and turning them into something else. So a very important point that you need to look at tree planting uh, and question it as much as possible. Um, and the other big thing that you may not have considered so much as habitat fragmentation. So this means instead of having one big habitat that is NEOM, and I think this is in the next slide, instead of having one big habitat that is NEOM, you actually have a whole lot of smaller habitats. So um, this map that I produced for you in the wood consultancy last year is shows the road, shows the major highways. So those thick red lines are where the highways go through, but it's a remoteness index. So smaller roads, some wildlife will cross smaller roads, some wildlife will cross no roads. Camels may cross most roads, so camels will probably go into the yellow areas and even the orange areas, whereas gazelles will probably stop at the yellow areas, and many oryx will stop at the green areas that are listed here. So if you map that out, that means that instead of having one big habitat, you've actually got already one, two, three, four, five or six smaller habitats. And also note that all of those habitats are disconnected from the coast. So in no case do you have wildlife feeling that it's safe to go down to the coast. So that's a limitation. All right. So I mentioned before, trees are an issue because they reduce carrying capacity. What you really want for rehabilitation is the shrubs and the grasses, because those are the things that livestock, ungulates, and wild ungulates, so oryx, gazelles, ibex. It's the smaller shrubs and the grasses that they will eat. All right, so grasses are the best, but there's plenty of good shrubs as well. Uh, so um, unless you can remove all of the wildlife, then all of the livestock, then register. You need to be looking at registration and registering wildlife. Sorry, not wildlife. Registering livestock, but also registering the water points. Because the thing is that all of the animals that you're interested in need water. They all need fresh water, drinking water, which means that if you're monitoring the watering points, you can control what animals are there. And you can do that relatively easily because there are so few water points. All right. So for water points, that means the wells. Wells can be monitored. They can be monitored remotely so that you can know at any time um, in in a remote office, you can have a satellite connection that tells you what the usage of that water point is. Um, but the other major one is water trucks, because Bedouin that are moving around are using water trucks. I'm not sure. I suspect that the water trucks are actually coming. Yeah, I suspect that the water trucks are coming from Tabuk from outside of the NEOM area. They may be coming from inside the NEOM area. We don't really know. But if you can control the use of water for livestock, then you can control the number of livestock, quite easily. So registering water points, registering livestock, and registering vehicles are the three things to consider. And the most important one of those is the water points. Um, yeah. Okay. Finally, I want to say that for fences, I understand you want to try to avoid fences as much as possible, and I think that's a very good thing to avoid them, because fences will fragment the habitat even further. You already have the habitat has been fragmented by all of those roads. The map that I showed you earlier, this one, that already it's not one habitat, it's many habitats. Okay, but if you, oops, but if you build fences and enclosures, you just increase that number, which means you've got more management zones to use, um, and so more control of animals. And of course, building a fence is expensive, and to some extent, you're damaging the area that you're that you're producing it. I mean, you can see in this fence that there's the cleared vegetation next to the fence. So it's not, if you put it up and you take it down again, there's a lasting damage from that fence as well as the cost of doing that. And so I recommend that you put that cost into the registration of water points and the monitoring of livestock populations instead. Now, some fences will be necessary. I think I very much recommend that you build some fences uh, to completely remove ungulates. That's both livestock and wildlife. The reason for that, there's two reasons. One is because then plants can go to their full size, produce seeds, and those seeds will help to revegetate outside of that area. The second reason is because it's only when you have that excluded area that you can see what the potential of the area is. The only way that you will know what the species that naturally grow there are is if you remove the continual grazing, and the only way to do that is through these exclusion zones. So I think some fences are necessary, but they need to be small and targeted to achieve those aims, so that it's very clear what you're doing. Okay. Um, yeah, I think I've mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, all ungulates, that's camels, goats, but also oryx, gazelles, ibex, they all need drinking water. They can't survive without drinking water. So therefore, monitoring and registering and monitoring these water points, whether they're mobile water trucks or fixed points, this is the easiest, the most effective way to regulate livestock. All right, it's not very hard to do, and compared to building fences, it's not very expensive. Um, yeah, and on that as well, to achieve your wildlife aims, you will probably need to add quite a lot of water points, for the sake of wildlife, and then they will need to be monitored to ensure that it's wildlife and not livestock that are using those. Now, another thing with that is that once the NEOM project builds, different you know, hotels, resorts, infrastructure around the place, they will create wastewater, and the amount of that wastewater will be significant. As in, so that the construction of those things and how that wastewater is used should be built into the planning of the wildlife also, because it will have a significant impact on the wildlife populations. Um, yeah. Okay. I think that's about it. So thank you for listening, and I hope this recorded okay.